Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of The Big Story with Olivia Quay. I'm Haryanto Diman.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has announced his new cabinet, the second reshuffle in about 9 months, and there are major changes.
Lawrence Wong was named Finance Minister. Now he takes over the ministry from Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat. In a short press conference 2 weeks ago, Mr. Heng said he would relinquish the finance portfolio and step down as the fourth-generation team leader. Now we'll discuss this later on in the show.
Well, Mr. Wong isn't the only move in the cabinet, with 6 other ministries seeing changes as well, including at the Ministries of Health, Transport and Manpower.
Have a look. The new appointments are circled in red and will take effect from May 15th. Well, let's hear more from PM Lee.
2 weeks ago, I told you I was planning a cabinet reshuffle, and today I'm announcing the new lineup. It will be a more extensive reshuffle than is usual this early in the term of government, and I have 2 reasons for this. One is that the Minister for Finance is changing. Following Budget 2021, Minister DPM Heng is relinquishing the finance portfolio. Finance is a key ministry, so when the finance minister changes, there are many repercussions for the other appointments. Secondly, I'm also moving the ministers for health, for manpower, and for trade and industry. These are the frontline ministries dealing with COVID-19 and its consequences. I considered making these changes after the general election last year, but then we were still in the thick of COVID-19, and so I decided that we needed to let the ministers concentrate on fighting COVID-19 at that point. Now that the COVID-19 situation is more stable, although by no means over, I'm able now to make the changes. And with these major moves, there are inevitably other consequential adjustments to the appointments. I'm therefore taking this opportunity to redeploy some of the other ministers to give them fresh responsibilities and gain different exposure and experience. Let me now run through some of the details. As I announced 2 weeks ago, Heng Swee Keat will continue as Deputy Prime Minister and Coordinating Minister for Economic Policies. He will also continue to oversee the strategy group within the Prime Minister's office, which coordinates our policies and plans across the government, as well as the National Research Foundation, NRF. As Finance Minister, Swee Keat has carried a heavy burden, especially during COVID-19, when he delivered multiple budgets within the year. Relinquishing finance will free him to concentrate more on the whole of government economic agenda, including chairing the Future Economy Council and incorporating the recommendations of the Emerging Stronger Task Force into the work of the Council. He will also continue to co-chair the JCBC, the Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation, together with PRC Vice Premier Han Zheng. Lawrence Wong will take over as Minister for Finance. Lawrence has been assisting Swee Keat as Second Minister since 2016, so he has the experience and is a natural fit for the job. The MOF team is otherwise unchanged. Minister Indrani Raja will support Lawrence as Second Minister. And on COVID-19, Lawrence will continue to co-chair the MTF, the Multi-Ministry Task Force. Chan Chun Sing will move to the Ministry of Education. Chun Sing has done an excellent job getting our economy back on track and preparing our industries and companies to respond to structural changes in the global economy. This has been a major national priority. Now I'm sending him to education, where he will build on the work of previous education ministers to improve our education system, to bring out the best in every child and student, and to develop young Singaporeans for the future. Nurturing people is quite different from growing the economy or mobilizing unions. And I look forward to Chun Sing taking on this fresh responsibility and broadening his experience. Gan Kim Yong will take over as Minister for Trade and Industry. Kim Yong has been Health Minister for almost a decade. In fact, almost a decade. He has been a point man in the fight against COVID-19, co-chairing the multi-ministry task force. At Ministry of Health, he implemented many major healthcare reforms and leaves a significant legacy of enhancements and improvements to the healthcare system. Right now, MTI, where he is going, is a key ministry. In MTI, Kim Yong will oversee our economic recovery from COVID-19 and pursue new opportunities to grow our economy. He is well suited to this role because he was previously Minister for Manpower, and he also served in MTI, in fact with me, very early in his career, before he spent 16 years in the private sector. Ong Ye Kung will take over as Minister for Health. He has been dealing with major challenges in transport since he took over transport from Khaw Boon Wan. He continued Boon Wan's improvements to the public transport system. Since COVID-19, Ye Kung has been working on reopening our borders and protecting our status as an air and sea hub. At the Ministry of Health, he will build on the strong foundation laid by Kim Yong in healthcare and deal with issues like aging, healthcare infrastructure, and healthcare finance. These need our unremitting efforts, spanning multiple health ministers. Ye Kung will co-chair the Ministerial Task Force on COVID-19 together with Lawrence Wong. Iswaran will take over as Minister for Transport. At MCI, he has significantly improved government's public communications and sense-making capabilities and helped us understand and respond to citizens' views and concerns. He's managed major upgrades to our tech infrastructure. For example, the award of the 5G tenders and the rollout for the new 5G networks. At Transport, he'll continue improving the quality, affordability, and environmental sustainability of our transport system. Another important task is to maintain our status as a global air and sea hub in the post-COVID-19 world. MOT also deals with ongoing sensitive airspace and maritime issues concerning our neighbors. Iswaran will also continue as Minister in charge of Trade Relations in MTI. At MCI, Josephine Teo will succeed Iswaran. As Manpower Minister, Josephine was responsible for a whole range of policies, including worker safety, labor relations, and retirement adequacy. Under her leadership, we achieved tripartite consensus on a 10-year roadmap to raise the re-employment age and the retirement age. We also made a major expansion of the Silver Support Scheme. Last year, in the unprecedented COVID-19 downturn, MOM led our efforts to support local job creation and training opportunities. At the same time, MOM has been on the front line dealing with the migrant worker dormitories. Through all this, Josephine has been steadfast in working to support our lower-wage workers and upgrade their incomes. This project is making good progress, and she will see this through, even though she has gone to MCI. Josephine will continue as Second Minister for Home Affairs. Tan See Leng will step up as Minister for Manpower. Since he was appointed Second Minister in MOM in July last year, he has been leading our efforts to tackle COVID-19 in the migrant worker dorms. Now he'll take on the full range of responsibilities in MOM. See Leng will continue as Second Minister in MTI. This will help us connect the work of the two vital economic ministries, particularly on restructuring the economy and the workforce. The rest of the ministers and ministries are unchanged.
So in this cabinet reshuffle, we're seeing changes to 7 ministries. So there's quite a bit to unpack. We're joined by the Straits Times' Singapore editor, Zakir Hussain. Zak, Lawrence Wong. He's already the Second Minister for Finance.
That's right, yeah.
And now
He's been
from
there for a few years, yeah.
Exactly. And then from May the 15th, he will be named, or he will be the Finance Minister.
That's right.
Is this move expected or not?
I think it was one many had anticipated,
Yep.
since it was announced 2 weeks ago that DPM Heng would relinquish the post. I think Mr. Lawrence Wong has helped in the preparation of, some of the past few budgets, and he's been involved in the discussions at the ministry. I think, but he's also tipped to be one of the 4G leaders, in the running for the next Prime Minister. So I think this was really seen as a sort of expected move, I'd say.
Right. So the expectation is that the Finance Minister is poised to become Prime Minister eventually. PM Lee and DPM Heng, back then, touted to be the next PM. But we've had far more finance ministers than prime ministers. Of course, talking about presidents also, we don't have much of a president, but is a finance minister role a prerequisite to becoming prime minister?
I don't think so. It needn't always be the case. But I think the finance ministry is one of the posts that, a potential prime minister or even deputy prime minister would have to have some experience in, I'd say, because the finance ministry is the one that controls the budgets across governments, and whoever's finance minister tends to have an acute understanding of various government policies, the major schemes and projects and programs, how much allocation and distribution is needed. In a way, it's considered a heavyweight ministry, and I think there are some of these ministries that are fairly heavyweight as well, and trade and industry as well as one of them.
Right. We're going to talk about the other ministries that saw some changes. For example, health. Gan Kim Yong, he's going to be replaced by Ong Ye Kung. And PM Lee also said in the press conference that Mr. Ong will be co-chairing the COVID-19 multi-ministry task force.
That's right, yeah.
And of course, this is all happening against the backdrop of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So what do you think of this move? The fact that the health minister, that position is being changed?
I think Prime Minister Lee did mention that, he was had actually been thinking of changing some of these portfolios even at last reshuffle some 9 months ago after the general election. But given that the COVID-19 situation then was still raging, it was maybe not the right time to make these changes. And given recent developments, but also the fact that, frankly, the COVID-19 situation has stabilized, and I think the work of the MTF, the Multi-Ministry Task Force, has evolved quite a bit. It used to be focused largely on public health measures and so on, and then it's transited to more vaccination. And some of it now is sort of really about a gradual reopening. And I think, it's not just the ministers, the two co-chairs who've been involved in the work of the MTF, actually. One thing we often forget is that several other ministries have always been involved in their meetings and their deliberations. Trade and Industry Minister, the Transport Minister, and I think Mr. Ong Ye Kung has had experience in that role. And I think this also won't be the last you'll see of Minister Gan Kim Yong at the MTF, because MTI is still overseeing quite a bit of business reopening, even support measures for affected businesses. So I think Mr. Gan will still be at some, if not all, MTF conferences. Yeah.
And on that note of MTF as well, the other ministry that, and of course PM Lee also pointed out earlier in his press conference that the other ministry that is almost at the forefront of our battle against COVID-19 is the Manpower Ministry.
That's right, yeah.
We are seeing a change as well.
That's right, yeah.
So Josephine Teo is being replaced by Dr. Tan See Leng.
Yep.
A new face, right?
Yep, that's right, yeah.
Promoted from, a minister, PMO, and then now taking a ministry on his own.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Thoughts on that?
think, Dr. Tan See Leng was always, when he entered politics last year, quite a seasoned individual, having had helmed a multinational healthcare group. And, he was heavily involved in the effort to tackle the pandemic in the dorms and reduce the infections and oversee the recovery and resettlement process. So I think he's gained quite a bit of mileage from that, and it seems like a natural progression for him to be the full Manpower Minister. At the same time, I think some of the other moves were affected because of the shifts, when you had the new finance minister and to make consequential adjustments, as PM explained.
Well, the other key change is in the Education Ministry, where we are going to see Lawrence Wong being, and his role be taken over by Mr. Chan Chun Sing. So Mr. Chan, he's been at MTI, Defence, MCCY, as well as social and family development, but never in education. So what do you make of this move?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting role. I mean, I think Mr. Chan Chun Sing is still tipped. He's one of the senior 4G, or one of the heavyweight 4G leaders. Remember at the last, in 2018, when the 4G decided on Mr. Heng Swee Keat, he'd asked for Mr. Chan Chun Sing to be his number 2. He is still, I think, he is still Second Assistant Secretary General in the party. He still plays a key role in, he's Minister in charge of the Public Service. But I think Education Ministry is a significant ministry. I think if you look at some of the previous ministers who've helmed it, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean, SM Tharman, DPM Heng, Minister Lawrence Wong was, I guess, in sort of placeholder mode for a while. And I think if you look at the exposure which the 4G ministers in the running have really had, I think Mr. Chan has not helmed education, and I think there's also, I think education isn't just about schools. I think we often tend to look at it as PSLE and your exams and but it's also about the whole higher education spectrum. So you have the universities and you have the polytechnics and ITEs, and currently the emphasis is on gearing Singaporeans for a more uncertain future when it comes to work, for instance, or careers. I think the notion, things like a career for life, things like being able to hold on to a job for 20 years, these are fast changing, and it's much harder. There's also continuing education, and I think it's much easier to kind of start thinking about putting some of these moves in earlier on in the education system, and I think Mr. Chan was involved in some of these efforts or suggestions as MTI Minister, I'd say.
Right. And I suppose the experience from MTI as well could be very useful for the
that's right.
sector as well, right? When you talk about jobs and out from education.
Yep.
So Zak, today's changes, major changes to 7 ministries. Help us understand, what is the message the government is trying to convey with these core appointments?
Well, I think maybe it wasn't stated as clear, but I think as clearly. But I think really, I think as PM mentioned, in reshaping the cabinet, it's putting the best person in the role, I'd say. And increasingly, I think as COVID-19 has shown, but also, in terms of Singapore's recovery from COVID-19, it's a much more complex landscape out there. And I think even governing and ministries are becoming more complex. The Education Minister doesn't just operate in isolation from the Trade and Industry Minister. Right? The Health Ministry doesn't work alone. There's got to be a lot of coordination with the Transport Ministry when you talk about things like reopening and reinfections, and I think concerns about tackling COVID-19. And so I think some of these decisions are kind of looked at from a larger perspective. And I think, as PM mentioned, the aim really is to give the 4G cabinet ministers more experience, more exposure, but also, over the coming few months especially, they're going to have to decide among themselves who their leader should be. And I think this experience of working with them in different roles, in different capacities, even co-chairing committees and task forces, I think that whole exposure is deliberately designed, I would say, to let them see how they gel with one another and cooperate.
I see. Okay, Zakia, actually this reshuffle was triggered by DPM Heng relinquishing his finance portfolio, which he said, about 2 weeks ago. So, what we saw today, why isn't it just a simple one-to-one replacement instead of, something that's more wide-ranging?
Yeah. I think given, had it been Minister Lawrence Wong taking over as Finance Minister, I think education is also a very full ministry, right? So the knock-on effects, I think is there, and I think it wasn't just that knock-on. I think the fact that PM did intend to make some of these changes 9 months, 12 months ago during the election, but because of the COVID situation, he decided Trade and Industry, Manpower, Health were key ministries that maybe there could have been some change, but maybe it might be best to just wait a little while. So in a way, just as the last cabinet reshuffle was a bit of an interim one, you didn't see as many changes. I think this reshuffle perhaps maybe makes up for that a little bit. But I think this is not going to be the last reshuffle as well. I think many of the full ministers were moved. I think you could say maybe in a year or a year and a half or so, you might see some of the junior ministers, the ministers of state, move up or shifting or being exposed to different roles as well, I'd say.
Right. Zakir, we have to ask, with today's changes, we had you on when, I had you on for a big story 2 weeks ago when we had the announcement of DPM stepping aside, and then we asked you with regard to the front runners for 4G. So we have to ask, with today's changes, does it change in any way the front runners as well?
I don't think so. I think the pool of front runners that I think many had identified last time still remains. It's the same 3-4 ministers. Mr. Lawrence Wong, yes, he's been given finance, but Mr. Chan Chun Sing is still very much in a key role. I mean, as Minister in charge of the Public Service and as Education Minister. Mr. Ong Ye Kung as well as Health Minister. He's been exposed to education and transport, and now health, a key role. And even Minister Desmond Lee, who I think, as PM mentioned, he's got a full plate on his things. He's assisting with MSF. He's also co-chairing the Emerging Stronger Task Force.
Right. Well, thank you so much again, Zakir, for coming on to the show. We've been speaking with Singapore editor for The Straits Times, Zakir Hussain.
Now, in time to come, we can expect PAP's 4G leaders to select another leader among them. In the press conference 2 weeks ago on April the 8th, they said they would need more time to reach a decision.
Lawrence Wong, Chan Chun Sing, Ong Ye Kung and Desmond Lee. Well, these are the 4 core members that political analysts consider the likely candidates to replace Mr. Heng and potentially succeed PM Lee. All 4 sit on PAP's Central Executive Committee.
Well, that's it from us. For more on today's Cabinet Reshuffle, visit straitstimes.com.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. See you next week on The Big Story.